623-3 AR style. We're going to try to break this down shotgun style, if you will. That way you have more knowledge in your kit bag, whether you're preparing to appear before a promotion board or competition board, or just trying to set yourself up for success as it comes to your NCOERs or the NCOERs that you will be charged to write. If this is something that you're into and you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on some future content. So when you look at AR 623-3, it's not that long of a document, right? It's only about 180 pages total from cover to cover. And most of what you're gonna be using is a lot less than that. It's closer to about 100 pages. If you didn't already know, it has the answers to a lot of questions that you may have to ask of yourself, or ask of a rater, or ask for somebody else. So make sure that if you have a specific situation or scenario that maybe we don't cover in this one, that you get in and use some Control F. So there's 4 chapters in the AR, right? Chapter 1 is kind of an introduction. Chapter 2 goes over the rating chain. Chapter 3 goes over the eval principles as a whole. And Chapter 4 is all about those bad times and scenarios when you or somebody that you know may need to redress or to argue with HRC something that might be in that NCOER. I'm gonna go ahead and throw up the first image screenshot from the ADP, from the AR, and this is from chapter 1. And the big thing on here is to note that there are mandatory and optional evaluations that we're going to discuss a little bit more in detail. And then also to remember that school evaluations are part of the evaluation reporting system. A lot of times dudes get that confused. And so the next screenshot is just about the ERS, that's evaluation reporting system. The functions is to provide information to HQDA for use in making personal management decisions. And then you have a whole slew of different components between the evaluation reports, indoctrination of the Army Leadership Requirements Model, and appraisal philosophy, and of course moving on into the rating chain. All right, so before we move on real quickly into chapter 2, which is where a lot of the meat and potatoes is, starting off with that rating chain, I'm gonna encourage you to always look in an appendix alpha, because that's always going to have your related documents and your required documents. So things that are going to relate to you is going to be things like AR 600-9, AR 600-20, and of course ADP DAPAM 623-3. Sometimes I can't think all that well, and so I need to have some daggum coffee. And also, disclaimer, right, this is all Stoker's opinions and thoughts about what we're talking about here. Of course, none of this is dadgum official.
We'll be watching you.
So some related content is going to be things like 600-8-2, all your 600-8s, which is your human resource. So 600-8, 600-8-2, 8-19, and 8-22 are all going to relate and correlate to what is put into and feeds into your NCOERs, right? Does that make sense? So chapter 2 goes over and begins with talking about the rating chain. Of course, we have the rated NCO, we have the rater, which is supposed to be that rated NCO's direct line supervisor. Then you have a senior rater, which should be the direct supervisor for the rater. And then if necessary, you're going to have a supplementary reviewer. So who can serve as a rater? So it's going to be anybody in the armed forces. It could be Coast Guard, it could be another branch, it could be Air Force, Marine, Navy, it could be Space Force, it could be a part of an allied command, it could be a DA civilian, right? There are some things that we're going to talk about as far as the senior rater, right? Because it needs to be, at least for that sergeant or staff sergeant, it needs to be a sergeant first class, it needs to be that rater. And then for sergeant first class, got to be a sergeant major or higher, and then for master sergeant, it needs to be senior in grade. So again, we're talking about sergeant major or somebody in that GS9 position. Another little screenshot here. So during that rating period, we have our support forms, which are used as part of that counseling process in order to aid with the final preparation of the evaluation report. And all of the forms you can do online. In fact, your NCOER should only be done online. We used to be able to do them hand jam. And so in that initial, right, so the rater should be providing that rated NCO their NCOER support form from their boss, and then their boss's support form as well. That way, that rated NCO is nested with their supervisor and with their supervisors. Everybody knows what everybody's duties and responsibilities are and what the goals are and objectives that have been placed on them in order to make that rated NCO set up for success. And so moving on into the supplementary reviewer, when is it required? It's required ultimately when nobody in that rating chain is a captain or higher, typically. So
there's something out there waiting for us.
All right, so moving on, talking about supplementary reviewers, when are they required? It's pretty easy, and for most part, I think most rating chains are going to have it right, because that supplementary reviewer for most NCOs is that senior rater or somebody in that rating chain is going to be a captain. If it's not, like let's say you have a buck sergeant and their senior rater is their rater is a sergeant first class, their senior rater is that platoon sergeant, and that senior rater is a lieutenant, then you need to have somebody outside. So that's when we're going to have that company commander come in to provide a review of the entire process and to make sure that things are in accordance with Army doctrine. So if the highest person in that rating chain is a master sergeant, a first sergeant, if they are a CW1 or 2, if they're a first or second lieutenant, then you got to have either a sergeant major, a CSM, a CW3 to CW5, or a captain or above. You also need to have a supplementary reviewer when there is no Army uniform personnel in the rating chain at all, and that's going to apply really to a small fraction of the number of NCOERs that are written, but those cases do exist, especially when you're not working in a joint environment. And we'll throw up another screenshot here. This is rating chain information. This is from 2-3. So the rating chain is established by the commander, commandant, or leader of an organization, and it is approved by the next higher commander. So that rating chain should be a published document that's available, and it's public, right? It's published and it's public. It's not hidden information. Nobody should be keeping this kind of info from you. So it should be maybe on a wall, maybe it's on a Teams channel, right? We're getting a lot more high speed, if you will, on how we communicate some of this information out there. So you should have access to this, and this should all be disclosed to you on that initial counseling. Then moving down to 2-10, we have the rated soldier. The rated soldier, man, you are the subject of the evaluation, and you have the responsibility, a considerable responsibility, and I quote, in the evaluation process. So a lot of times, you know, the rated NCO likes to say, well, it's not me, it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. But you need to understand that communication is established from lower to higher. So if you have a question, if you want to know how things are going, yes, you should be getting those quarterly counselings, but it is up to you to make sure that you are nested in with your seniors. We already talked a little bit about the rater, but here's a little screenshot from 2-12, right? Again, the raters can provide their support form along with the senior rater support form to that rated soldier receiving an NCOER. And of course, we should be discussing the daily duties and responsibilities with them within 30 days of the beginning of the rating period. Chapter 2-14 goes over the senior rater, right? And their role, of course, is to use their position and experience to evaluate the rated soldier's performance and potential. And I will tell you that these senior raters' comments are the single biggest thing on that NCOER that a board is going to look at, because they're the ones who have that experience, they have that knowledge. You know, they're the ones who are have maybe already been a rater for a multiple amount of times and periods. And so they're using their whole breadth of experience as it comes to rating and providing that potential for that rated NCO in their future service. So what types of NCOERs are there? There are several types. You have mandatory reports, and then you have optional reports, right? So mandatory reports are going to include things like a change of rater, an annual, extended annual as needed, a change of duty, a TDY, TCS, and then a relief for cause. And then some of your optional reports will include things like a complete the record or senior rater option, and 60-day optional reports. And these are typically done prior to a board convening, so that you have one last eval that a promotion board can take into consideration for that rated NCO. And that's what those were really all about. On an NCOER, we have a lot of things that we can talk about, right? That rater is going to talk about duty performance. What is that rated NCO done during that duty period? And then the senior rater is going to talk about potential service and positions and schooling and things of this nature of that individual. But there are some things that are prohibited, and here's a screenshot of that as well. So, you know, if things aren't brief, if they are too brief, you know, we should be using bullet comments, and we should not include things like using excessive use of capital letters, unnecessary quotation marks, repeated words, right? We want to be brief, bold, and to the point when it comes to our bullets. We can't talk about things like unproven derogatory information, whether it's a reference to an incomplete, whether it's formal or informal investigation. Should only be talking about actions or investigations that have been processed and completed prior to that through date on that NCOER. And this is where a lot of mistakes happen, and this is where NCOERs may get kicked back from HRC for having prohibited comments on the NCOER. And of course, we can't do things like talking about race, color, religion, ethnicity, family members, none of that stuff. You can't talk about NJP if it's filed in a restricted portion of individual's record. And we shouldn't be talking about protected communication, like if somebody talks to IG, Sharp, Chaplain, you know, those things are protected dialogues and communication, so they should not find their way onto that NCOER. Rated period may cover an extended period of time, and so here's a little table that you can use as reference. And ultimately, the bottom line up front is you need to have 12 months of rated time from that through date, from the from date to the through date, that rated NCO for an annual, in this case would be an extended annual, to be covered. So maybe you PCS and you take 30 days leave. So that 30 days leave, it's non-rated time, and that's not a big deal. But let's say you left on January 1st and you didn't get somewhere till January 31st, and then you had in processing for 10 days and you had permissive TDY for 10 days, and now it's really the middle towards the end of February before you really start to get to work, and then you get your initial counseling almost by the middle of March, right? And then maybe you go to school, maybe it's SLC or ALC, and then you're gone for a couple months. So that through date should not be January 1st or that following date, right? From date back here was January, or that through date back here was January 1st. Your next through date should not be January 1st. It could be 12, 15, 18 months of total time, and you just put in non-rated codes. Non-rated codes, team, that's not a big deal. You just need to make sure that it's annotated properly on the NCOER when it's being built, right? And then chapter 5 goes in, and again, so our last chapter goes into redress options, like did somebody, because when HRC receives an NCOER, they are assuming that all that administrative data is correct, that the duties, responsibilities are good to go, and that everybody's looked over it, right? They know and understand that if a supplementary has reviewed it, that all the admin stuff, you know, all that stuff is good to go. But if somebody put down something that was prohibited in nature as far as any sort of comment, and you want to redress it, you want to appeal to HRC to have something changed or to have an NCOER pulled, that's when this last chapter goes into, and that's a whole other subject and topic that we won't get into the finite details here, but just make sure if that applies to you or to your NCO that you get into the regulation and understand what that process is, and know that your rating chain and your NCOER, your NCO support channel and your chain of command is there to assist you as needed. A couple things that happen quite often that I see is NCOs who come and report to my unit. Maybe they come from overseas, maybe they come from a CONUS assignment, and they didn't, their NCOER was not complete. What happens then? So you have, and this is a little bit outside of 623-3, a little bit, but you know, you have 90 days to get an NCOER to HRC before they consider it late. What is that 90-day window? When does that start or end? And so again, it is not 365 days plus 90 days from that last through date, because they don't know if there's non-rated time or not. So if you submit an NCOER and that through date is January 1st, and it doesn't get to HRC until, well, January, February, March, until May something, then they're going to consider it late. So again, you know, a lot of times what happens is somebody may come from overseas, somebody may be just coming from one side of the country to the other, and they left, and NCOs sucked, and so they didn't get that proper NCOER done and submitted on time. When you report, you just need to have that open dialogue and conversation with your senior, maybe your first sergeant, because they can help open and extend that dialogue and even get CSM to CSM in order to make sure things get done in a timely manner, because you need those NCOERs to be submitted and be a part of your record. Because if you don't, when you get looked at, there's going to draw a lot of huge questions, comments, and concerns that's going to arise about you. So I hope that kind of helps out. Again, if you have some other questions or anything as it relates to NCOERs, make sure you drop them down below. And we're going to continue to keep this conversation moving. Again, by looking at the DA PAM, we're going to look at the NCOER itself, talk about some bullets, talk about those senior-rater comments, and some things that I've seen over the years as how, in my opinion, that we have failed the system and what it's designed to do. And we'll continue to keep this conversation rolling, man. Look, team, I appreciate all you guys. You know, you've been hanging out, you've been dropping good comments, good questions, and I think we're getting a good thing going on here, and so I appreciate your time. Until then, you stay out there, you keep grinding, and you stay stoked.